like to know that. Thank you, sir.
Phil Twyford.
Chairman, I want to address my comments to supplementary order paper number 321 in the name of the Honourable Dr Nick Smith. What this amendment does, Mr Chairman, is that it legislatively directs Auckland Council to devote 3 hectares of land that they own at Point England to be turned into sports fields. And secondly, it directs Auckland Council to ban the Point England Reserve from having cows on it. This is wacko stuff. Dr Smith has wandered off the reservation once and for all. There is a kangaroo loose in the top paddock, Mr Chairman, because the Minister is using the time of this Parliament to tell Auckland Council not to run any cows on their parkland that they own. This amendment is telling Auckland Council that it must turn over 3 hectares of land for playing fields. It is absolutely wacko stuff. I have never come across anything like this in 8 years in Parliament. Thank you very much, Dr Smith. If there's a sign of how exasperated Auckland Council is about this, it is that the Mayor, Phil Goff, today took the unusual step of releasing a letter to the media that he has written to Dr Smith, and the language that is used in this letter is very strong. He points out that the lack of consultation is simply not acceptable. It's clear from this letter that Dr Smith tabled this amendment in the House without even consulting Auckland Council. But he purports to use the law to tell Auckland Council how to manage the detail of their parkland. The letter from the Mayor points out that there's a total lack of consideration of the technical feasibility or the environmental impacts of what Dr Smith's amendment tries to do. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment have confirmed that they have done no technical work to assess the feasibility of establishing the 3 hectares of playing fields on the only bit of the reserve that could accommodate them, and that is the headland. Open space on the precious headland at Point England is going to be turned into playing fields by the edict of Dr Nick Smith. This is the bizarro world of the Minister of the Environment in this national government. I cannot believe what's going on here. As it stands, the Point England Development Enabling Bill, if passed into law, will halve the area currently available for the dotterel. And we're going to have more to say about the dotterel, sir, the northern New Zealand dotterel, in this debate. This heightens the importance of the headland for these species, because that's the only bit of land that's left for them. But Dr Smith wants to turn that last remaining bit of habitat under this bill into playing fields. It absolutely beggars belief. But the other really bizarre thing about this amendment from Dr Smith, he's telling the council that they have to turn over this land into playing fields. The law will require, the RMA will require the council to seek a resource consent for that. The legal advice that the council's had is that they won't get a resource consent to do what Dr Smith's amendment requires them to do. Brilliant. So Dr Smith wants to tell them by law they have to do this thing. The RMA tells them they have to get a resource consent to do it. They probably won't get a resource consent, and therefore they're going to be in breach of Dr Smith's law. This is wacko stuff. This is what it's come to under Dr Smith's tenure as the Minister for the Environment, the Minister for Housing. It's an absolutely bizarre and weird circumstance that we find ourselves in. That National Party members should be embarrassed to be sitting here in the House tonight debating this amendment in the name of Dr Dick Smith. It makes a laughing stock of the Minister and this government. If they've got a shred of self-respect, they'll vote against this amendment from Dr Smith and consign it to the dustbin, which is where it belongs.
Penny Henare.
Excellent, Mr Chair.